Welcome back to Rethinking Porn Addiction. My name's Nate. We've got Jake, Hans, Kristen, and Doug here. We are the same cast from last week, and we're excited to pick up this conversation again, kind of where we left off from last week. My commitment to you guys is that I'm not going to break down sobbing this week.
Don't commit to that, Nate.
I guess that's an unfair commitment, isn't it?
I don't think that needs to be the commitment, because that was just an honest expression, and to have a place to be able to express.
And it makes it okay for me to do it, because I know at some point that's going to come out. So
Yeah.
I would like us all just to imagine what it's like for somebody watching this broadcast who's wanting to see an honest and vulnerable discussion of the subject matter we're here to talk about, and to see the honesty and genuineness that you showed the way for, Nate, last week, is really an important thing to make a really kind of memorable part of why people might tune in. And I think what you just did is so often what I see men do. Mm-hmm. How do I talk with you the next time after being so vulnerable?
Yeah. Thanks, Doug. I appreciate that. So I think a great place to start today's conversation is asking just the simple question, what is pornography? That's kind of the title of the show. And I think we get everybody's got a definition. Everybody's got a thought of what pornography is. When I say the word or hear the word pornography, I'm pretty sure that what I think is different than probably what each one of you think, and probably different than what every person who's listening thinks. Mm-hmm. So can we kind of like wade into that territory of what pornography is?
Yeah.
And maybe even just redefine it for this show?
I would encourage the starting point be the three of you talk about it, because this show is about men's conflict with this subject matter. And Kristen's and I idea of what that is not anything as useful as what the three of you understand it to be, and why it's been a source of conflict. This is the center discussion right here. So unless we hear from you what this is, we don't really have a discussion today.
Agreed.
That's a good place to start. Hans or Jake, do you guys want to start, or do you want me to?
I'm taking a long pause because just thinking about it, I can already feel myself uncertain in that territory of saying, what is porn?
I think,
but that's probably a good thing. I'm really excited actually to see where it goes, because I love the opportunity to hear what you guys think, and then hear what Chris and Doug might be able to layer on top of that with a more professional, clinical experiential wisdom.
Hans, don't worry about starting with clarity.
Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate that.
Just start. Just start.
So thinking about what is porn, I think the easiest definition that comes to my mind is something around imagery that is sexually explicit, having to do with nudity or intercourse or something of that nature. Obviously not well refined, but that's when I think of porn, that's what comes to my mind if I was to try to express it to somebody else. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You two go now.
No.
No, I mean Nate and Jake. I want Nate and Jake to go.
Oh, good. Okay, good. Thank you.
Jake, are we gonna have a
Nate,
stand
you
up?
want to have a run at it?
Yeah, mine is pretty simple. I think porn to me is what I look at when I want to masturbate.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how else to define another. Like, that's how I would qualify it, is when I want to like pursue sexual pleasure.
Yeah.
That's not with another person. I look at porn.
And it's connected with masturbation.
Typically, yeah.
And almost maybe always orgasm as well.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, because I don't like, if I see like a naked body or a scantily clad body or two people being romantic in a TV show, I don't necessarily think of that as pornography. But if I see something similar and I am like pursuing sexual pleasure in a different state, I do. So like the context in which I'm experiencing the content is almost more important than the content itself.
Jake, I want to hear your thoughts. I have something I'm excited to say after what Nate just said, but I really want to hear what you think.
Well, this was interesting because when I thought about like what is pornography, I sort of drew a blank, right? I think for me, the first thing I kind of went to was, well, anything designed to excite or entice, or some of these other words that I've heard in the past. But then as I started to sit with that, I'm like, that doesn't necessarily feel, because there's such a broad spectrum. And that's where I kind of wondered about the limitation of the word pornography, because, or sexual imagery, or whatever you want to use in their placeholder, was it really is sort of a broad scale. And I love that Nate just pointed on that of, you have stuff that's designed to excite or entice through advertising, and then you also have, like your full scale, pornography that like is on the internet and everywhere. And it's kind of hard to draw the line of at what point does it transfer from salacious advertising to pornography or things like that. That's one of the things where as I started thinking about how to discuss this, I was like, man, I don't know a lot. And so I was really looking forward to this.
Jake, something that strikes me is something that you might consider to be pornography is something that may not even like trigger any sort of like pleasure or eroticism in me, and vice versa. Something that I might find to be pornographic to you might just like not be a big deal at all. I think it's so interesting that we talk about this word as if we're talking about the exact same thing, when I think it can be different for everybody.
Well, it is different. And this is what came up really quickly. Nate, you said something at the beginning of, when I want to masturbate, I watch porn. And that still didn't necessarily give me an idea of what porn, like what does porn mean? It would be the same thing of when I want to chill out, I want to watch a movie. Well, if my partner was like, Chris wants to chill out, and Jake put on a horror film, I'd be like, not my idea of chilling out. Movies broad. And so I still think we talk about porn as if we're all on the same page. We understand exactly what that means, that it's one thing, period, and still don't get to the root of what this is, but we talk and negotiate and act as if that we're both clear, or we're all clear.
Yeah.
Hans, what was your inspiration?
Thanks, Doug. It's cool. I can feel myself moving already, or refining and better defining. Nate used the word, it's more context than content. And that really rang true to me about when I imagine porn, it has that, it has some energy around it of masturbation or sexual excitement, or it's almost for that purpose. Like the image can be totally benign, but if there is that energy around it, then it moves towards porn. And I think the thing that I thought about was, we talked last time in our first session about my son watching The Sandlot and seeing that scene in the swimming pool with all the high school girls in bikinis, and that was sexually exciting for him. I wouldn't call it porn. Like, no, I don't think the majority of people would see that and say that's porn. But if you were to use that in the manner of self-pleasure or excitement or masturbation, then it takes on a totally different context. So maybe, I guess what I'm getting at is the context part of it seems really important to me, along with what the actual imagery is.
Okay, I have a question for all three of you.
Yeah.
Who is responsible for that energy? Because if the definition of pornography is anything that is exciting or arousing, then that makes it pretty complicated, because there's a lot of things that are exciting and arousing, because arousal is a body response. Like that is a healthy human sexual response. Right. But so I'm curious, just If it excites you, does that mean it's pornography? If you visually see something and it excites you, like who is responsible for creating that context? Is it in your mind or is it theirs?
What do you mean by theirs?
The producer, the creator. Who determines the intent or
I wrote here, Hans' son learned that images can create sexual pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And it just happened to be that one.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an interesting thread to answer your question, Kristen.
Mm-hmm.
That it's a relationship. It's not one or the we always want to go to these binary explanations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what Hans' story so beautifully tells us is that the human body has relationships with the environment and has these nervous pleasure centers that we're given in our body that are enormously fabulous. And we learn how those systems of pleasure get aroused. And imagery can do this and has always been able to do this. And there's a lot of conflict about the fact that imagery arouses the sexes. We've not settled about how we feel about that.
Mm-hmm.
So as we're having this conversation,
does it have to be limited?
Sorry, go ahead, Jake. Go ahead.
Does it have to be? Thanks, Nate. Does it have to be limited to just imagery? Because this is what's interesting is I know there's erotic literature, and I also know that I'm really into music, and lyrics are a major component of the messaging in music. And I know there are some songs that I would like. Does it have to be just imagery? Can pornography span? Is there a spectrum beyond just that?
Jake, what's the thread between all of those different media that you're wanting to draw attention to? There's something you see that happens in all of those situations. What is it? I really like where you're inviting us to go. What is it? What do you know happens in those situations?
To me, it's matching the intent, like the intent of myself, wanting to experience pleasure or whatever, and using this to stimulate my imagination, to stimulate those thoughts or whatever, so that I can seek that out and then find that.
So stimulation or arousal, that's what came to mind when you asked that question, Doug. I think the thread that I noticed in those was use for sexual arousal.
But that's a verb also, Hans. You put in a verb like used for, because there is something also of, and people can have a lot of conflict of having an arousal response. And there is messaging that we all grew up with in a conservative Christian culture of do nothing to arouse.
Right.
So if your body has an arousal response, it's like, oh crap, I've done
something wrong.
What's the difference between having an arousal response and having pleasure?
Arousal would be instinctual or something that my body does automatically, perhaps, and pleasure would be I'm purposefully continuing that arousal to orgasm or some other completion. Yeah.
There's a word that we haven't said yet that I think is worth mentioning that might be worth exploring here. And the word that I've been thinking of over and over for the last few minutes is the word lust. It's a really popular word in religious circles. And I feel like lust constitutes like seeking pleasure in an inappropriate way, or in a selfish way, or in a, I don't know how you describe that, but when the pleasure that you're seeking is purely selfish in nature, it's all for you. I think that I might be doing a poor job at explaining this, but to me, that's kind of what constitutes something like. I think growing up, I wasn't against experiencing pleasure. I was just against. I had a moral conflict with experiencing pleasure in a context of pornography and masturbation because it was self-centered and it was selfish and it was a lust-filled pleasure and not a mutual like exchange of pleasure. It wasn't like a sanctioned type of pleasure that I had been taught was appropriate. And so I'm wondering if this lust has something to do with it.
Take us to this moment then. What was it like for you to be in that conflict? Because you didn't stop masturbating.
No.
Okay, right. So tell us about what's it like to be in that conflict and still pursue the behavior. Even all those messages are there. It's you got it. They taught you well. You understand the message. But what's it like to continue the behavior knowing the message backwards and forwards?
It's pretty terrible. There's a few times in my life that I think I felt less of myself than after like an orgasm, sitting in front of a computer screen, and like all of a sudden the porn that was so interesting a few minutes ago, like it's repulsive. It's weird. It goes from like something that's enthralling and captivating to literally a few seconds later being like kind of gross and disgusting. And then you just kind of close the tab or close the screen or close the computer. And then you sit there and think like, wow, I'm a terrible person. Like, why did I do that? That was not, it wasn't worth it. It wasn't like, I feel kind of gross.
Kristen, I want to hear from Jake and Hans.
Jake and Hans were both nodding, which I appreciated.
This is such an important thread. I'm thinking of the viewer. I want them to hear these three men take us to this moment. Is Nate alone
you want to
here?
give a shot?
Very few times in my life have I looked at porn and afterwards been like, oh, I'm really glad I did that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but so here's, I mean,
go Jake.
Here's my question. I've got a pretty big delay, so I'm trying to like manage this. But that isn't based off of the imagery, right? Like that's your experience that you have with this. That you go from, searching something out, and then I wonder, and this is, I mean, I'm sort of thinking as I'm speaking, but if you didn't have the religious upbringing or the type of upbringing you had, would you be able to have that experience where you engaged in pornography, you had solo sex with yourself, and then I'm off and I'm doing my thing? Or if it's the shame that you are feeling is a result of the way that you were first introduced and discussed, about pornography or imagery, that it is bad, it's this terrible thing. And the other thing I want to say was, when you talked about lust, I thought that was really interesting because lust and passion to me are sisters. They're very closely intertwined. And lust is almost the like hedonic version of passion, right? Like if passion between, passion is this intense feeling, this desire, which is a great thing to feel, but then you get into lust and it almost turns this corner, or the flip side of that coin, that I think we've been taught this way, that lust is, gnarly and predatory and all these other things, that it's truly harmful in a sense.
Jake, how would you answer that question in this moment of conflict? Is it my religious teaching, or is it some other part of myself that I am in conflict with about my pleasure and use of imagery? Can you describe that moment of conflict for you? Because it's a great question.
Okay, so I think this just goes into my core beliefs now and my values, that I think if you do something that causes harm to another soul, you will feel it. And I think if there's any sort of exploitation, then I think you have to be numbed in order to, just walk off like nothing's bad or nothing's wrong. I also think that it is a little bit of conditioning, in the sense that we are taught that this is bad, and then we engage in it and we feel bad. Just like when we lie to our parents and we get caught when we're younger, we feel bad because this is sort of the conditioned call and response that we have. But so those two kind of interweave each other. But I am a firm believer of, if there is exploitation or harm caused on another soul, you will feel that, unless you're really numb. That's just sort of the human. That's humanity. That's us. That's who and how and what we are.
Hans,
Nate, Jake,
you have thought about this question, Hans?
When Nate was talking about feeling shame and feeling terrible sitting in front of a computer screen, that's totally my experience also, 100%. And then what Jake was moving towards about lust, I feel as well. I feel with the religious and conservative background that I had growing up, there certainly is a moral spectrum, or there are moral expectations that come from that I carry and that are part of me, and I experience. And it's been really interesting for me to, with porn and with a myriad of other topics also, try to take a step back from that and experience personally, agnostic from any religious or conservative teaching, what's my moral compass and my moral fiber and my moral being telling me. And what Jake was saying, I echo. There is something about exploitation and about very self-serving and very selfish use of porn or any other anything else really that's to an excess, that would be an excess that really I can feel morally, for me personally, causes conflict. That wasn't clear, I think, what I was kind of stream of consciousness talking there, I guess. But yeah, Doug, tell me the question again, so now that I'm talking through it out loud, I can even answer it better. What was the original question that you posed?
There's a conflict in this moment. Is it my religious teaching? Is it my principled creed and sacred text and teaching from my religious community that is living in my body and mind and soul in that moment when I'm flooded with feelings the minute after I've had this pleasure with imagery? Or am I meeting myself? And in addition to the religious teaching, there's a part of myself there as well that I'm in conflict with or unclear about. And Kristen, the reason I wanted all three men to talk is I find there's where do men ever speak of this conflict? I mean, where is there ever three men in a row saying this and talking about it? I mean, so that's why I wanted to let's make this sacred space first, and then we can get into conversation. But that moment is just one that everybody's alone and completely cut off from any conversation with another human being in that minute.
Mm-hmm. Yep, agreed.
Doug, you mentioned as you were saying that, I think about sex with my wife and the feeling after that as compared to orgasm on my own. And they're totally different experiences. And I don't know, I can't say for certain, is that my own moral objection to that, or is it my upbringing and religious background and what society has told me that causes that conflict? Sitting here right now, I don't know.
I'm chagrined, but I introduced a binary. I don't mean it to be a binary discussion.
Sure.
They're both there.
Yeah.
Can I possibly pose something that might expand it a bit? Because I started to notice some of the words that are being used, and I heard the words selfish, lust. There was selfish, lust, self-serving, and I think there could be this idea that we are only allowed, or the best kind of orgasm and the most sacred and the most appropriate is to orgasm with another person, that we only share our orgasms with that person. And I look at sometimes the rules we have around sexuality don't apply in other areas of our life. So Hans, my question for you is, throughout the day, do you only eat meals with Cami? I'm wondering, or do you like when you're off at work, do you maybe go to a drive-through and you get a hamburger?
Yeah.
Do you enjoy that hamburger?
Yeah. Yes. I obviously eat by myself also. And when I eat with others, I love that experience also.
Do you love to maybe share a good meal with Cami that you're like, there's a different enjoyment, but do you judge the individual like fast food experience, or do you have a fine dining? And then you and Cami were hardcore Chili's for like years. That was your complete place. So I guess I'm just looking at the variety of sexual experiences that we can have, but we might start to judge or only give ourselves room that one type of experience is okay instead of it being different. And we might have preferences like I prefer, and this can be, do you see? So that's one way is I look at our rules we have around sexuality, and when I apply them into other areas of life, we don't have those kind of rules in most other places.
Yeah. So to me, Kristen, what I'm thinking about right now, what this image brings to mind, I love this analogy, is like sex with my wife is a nice dinner out on the town where we kind of sometimes we get dressed up, sometimes we don't, but we go out and we hit up our favorite spot and we get food that we like. And then looking at pornography is when I shut myself in the pantry and eat an entire sleeve of Oreos and then curl up in a ball afterwards and go, I feel so sick, I want to throw up.
Okay, and I have a question though. Would you feel that same way if you and Ange had agreements in place and you talked about the variety of sexual experiences you both would like to enjoy, that you both can have? Like there's a component here, and Doug, please step in, because there's a component here where I'm wondering what contributes to wanting to go into the closet and feel terrible about.
I have a different idea about that.
Yeah,
honey, I've got my Oreos. I'm going into the closet. I won't come out until I eat them all, and I've sufficiently sat in my fetal position for long enough. See you soon.
Right.
Right. But so yeah, there's an interesting thing because
there's also that.
You go ahead, Jake. Sorry, I keep talking over you.
Okay, so no, I'm on delay. I'm so sorry. I should refresh my browser, but I think there's also we need to look at why, right? Like maybe you can sit there and you can be like, man, I've had a terrible day and I just got into an intense conversation with a person who thinks way different from me, and we got it was intense, and I just need to go pound a sleeve of Oreos because that sugar will help me, and this is just what I need. This is my body going, this is what I need. And I think that applies in sort of like food circumstances and situations, and it probably applies into sexual situations as well. But we don't give ourselves that latitude. We don't give ourselves this ability to say, man, I'm having an off day, or whatever else, but it's like, I want to go and just have this type of experience, and that's it, period.
So Jake,
because
why do you?
That's what I need for whatever reason. Walk
us through. What is it about the current situation that is not just the routine that could happen in a home? You know, I need to go, honey, for the next half an hour, I'm going to go in the bedroom. I'm going to have some time alone. I'm going to masturbate. This is going to just feel so good to me, and I just need this right now. So I just need some privacy, and I'll see you soon. What is it about that being not a conversation that would occur in almost every home?
Because, okay, great question. And I love this. And so that's exactly what I was thinking when Nate said that thing of, and we're talking about the shame of, if we walked in, we're like, honey, I'm going to go knock one out of the park. Like, this is what I got to do. And then at the end of it, we're done. Would we close the browser tab and I'm like, oh man, what did I do? Or would it be walking out of got that done, all the way, let's, move on to next. And I think there is a vulnerability to so much pornography and masturbation is viewed as rejection of the opposite, rejection of the partner or the spouse. And I don't think that necessarily has to be the case. when you were talking about your example, like if Chris came into me and said, like, I'd be like, okay, great, I'll keep kids busy, go take care of yourself, because there's so many other facets of our life where she can go and take care of herself if she needs to. But that's me coming from my best place, looking at her, which I think we've got there over time and a journey, but it is incredibly vulnerable to go and say, hey, this isn't a rejection of you. This is just a me thing. And this is what I want. And I would like to go do this. And then there's no lying, there's no betrayal, there's no rejection. And I think at the end of that session or whatever it is, there's probably not going to be that icky feeling, right? That shame or just that sensation afterwards of like, oh, man, the fetal position, right? It's like, man, I've been saving up for my cheat meal and I down my sleeve of Oreos. I'm good. This is a chance where like I needed to have my solo sex session, had it, I'm good. On to the next.
So I have a question, because there's a complex. I love the way that you just distilled that. I think that's that's one side of the picture. And the other side of the picture is your partner. And I think a lot of the pain around pornography comes from the narrative that I have in my head that if I do this, I'm hurting my partner. Like there's a sense of disapproval, or like there's a judgment around, and I think this might, I don't know if I'm going to articulate this the right way, but there's a judgment around, we often have judgments around what brings somebody else pleasure. So if I go have a solo sex session and we talk about it, what if there's a curiosity in my wife's brain of like, well, what's he looking at? And does he like that more than me? And does that thing align with my value system? And do I find it repulsive and gross? And if I find it repulsive and gross, am I going to start thinking of my husband as being repulsive and gross? And do I even want to know what he's looking at? And and then there's my interpretation or expectation of what she might be thinking of me in that moment while I'm looking at what I'm looking at to bring myself pleasure. And I think that's what creates the conundrum for me. Is if it was as simple as like, hey, I'm going to go take care of myself in the other room for 30 minutes, that's one thing. But underneath that, like it's one thing to go in the shower and like rub one out and be done. And it's another thing to go in your office or whatever, in front of a screen and look up specific types of like scenes or imagery that you're going to use to like get you to that place. Because I think there's judgments around what specifically you're looking at, which kind of adds complexity and nuance and sometimes pain to the process. So I think there's a difference between masturbating and then looking at sexual imagery and masturbating, because there's judgments around the sexual imagery.
I'm going to propose the intensity and the heat of that moment. The tension of that moment is because it's the only time the subject is in the house. It's not talked about in non-heated moments. It's not talked about right after masturbating or right before. It is a subject that is just not discussed. And so that moment holds way too much authority and emphasis because all of the nuances you just talked about, Nate, have not been openly discussed. There's no agreement. There's no, how's this for you? How's this for me? I mean, if you were preparing a meal with 10 guests, you'd go into more detail and conversation than would ever be in the conversation about this part of one's life and how you share a home and where one masturbates and how one feels about that, and when is certain media not within somehow our boundaries or agreements around our relationship. And these are incredibly difficult conversations. And where has anybody been given any help in how to have them?
Definitely.
And so without help, without any kind of guidance, judgments fill that void.
There's a really great question that's being posed by Derek, who's watching live. And he says, I really like this line of reasoning, but from my religious context, the bounds before marriage are really strict and the bounds after marriage are strictly between a husband and wife. Mm-hmm. And so like you take that context into account and then add on to that the fact that that we also, in most religious communities, we attribute worthiness to like the sexual acts that you participate in can affect your worthiness before God. And so I think that also adds an extra layer of complexity on this conversation. Is not only is this a relationship between myself and my sexual desires and my partner and their opinions of my sexual desires and what makes me feel pleasure. On top of that, there's the layer of God and what does God approve of, and would God approve of what I'm watching or what I'm doing right now in the context of my relationship with him and the relationship with my partner. And so like this is, I think, where it gets complex and where it gets painful for people, is because it's not just about pursuing an orgasm or pursuing pleasure. There's also a lot of morality and a lot of relationships and a lot of judgments wrapped into the simple act of like seeking an orgasm by yourself.
So how have the men in this room faced this dilemma? Because I think it's a very real one, Nate. This is the world. So how is this relationship come into the situation beyond the couple and the relationship with yourself, but also the relationship with your God, your spiritual life, your religion, your religious community, your sacred text, your relationship with the hereafter, your relationship with morality in the eyes of your God? How do you deal with all of that?
Lots of avoidance and bargaining on my part. Avoidance of like just trying to hide it and not talk about it and hope that and despite knowing that every other guy is probably dealing with something similar, like pretending that we're not the ones who deal with it, and then bargaining with God saying, I won't do it again. 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 And even sometimes bargaining with your partner, I won't do it again. I won't do it again. Or with yourself, I won't do it again. And then whether it's a day or a week or a month or a year later, you find yourself doing it again. And then you go, ugh, I won't do it again. So that's been my experience.
Thank you.
I'm noticing a lot of, again, similar to what you're saying, Nate, and what I was thinking a few minutes ago when we were talking specifically a lot about the use of porn and solo sex when it's within a relationship. Prior to my marriage, I still had a lot of, and maybe my conflict was even worse then. I had a lot of conflict around the use of porn and masturbation when it was just me, myself, and I. And a lot of that I can feel was from my religious upbringing. And thinking back now, I'm thinking to myself, how cool would it have been if I had been able to be at peace with myself about my use of porn and masturbation before I brought all of that mess into a relationship with my wife and into a marriage? That would have been.
What would that peace look like, Hans?
What a peace would look like would mean that I would feel comfortable with my usage or non-usage of porn, and I would be able to align that with that would be in alignment with my religious views also. Mm-hmm. And I'm getting way into territory here that's really complex, and maybe that's why the pain is there for everybody. There's almost a moral exploration I have to do with myself just to figure out my own personal morality. And then there's a moral exploration that I have to do with religion and God and figuring out what that moral relationship is. And then there's a moral relationship that I need to figure out with my wife or my partner or whatever relationships I am in. And it seems like there's almost 3 different things there I need to explore and figure out. And they all get combined together. And then it's this big stringy mess that Doug talked about that never gets talked about. And I only experience it after orgasm when I look at porn. And holy shit, that moment sucks sometimes. And so figuring out, detangling that would be fascinating and amazing.
Yeah.
You get clearer when you practice. That was really well said.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks a lot, Doug. Thanks for the space. I can't say enough about how much I love this opportunity to talk with you for. It's really, we're having these conversations that don't get had anywhere else. You're exactly right, Doug. And I'm honored to be here and be part of that. I think
I want to hear from Jake.
Yeah.
On what exactly? I think
Well, Jake, what do you think of this idea of a moral conflict? In three different areas. I have to figure out my own standards and ethics and values around, my sexual relationship with myself, where I stand, how I deal with these moral conflicts in my religion and my faith community and my sacred text, my relationship with God, and how I deal with this part of my life in the context of a relationship, a partnered relationship, and that these are all three areas of conflict or at least exploration.
Yeah. So I love what Hans said in sort of defining these three things. My mind, when we started talking about this, kind of went to a different place where I am, just in my spiritual journey and my faith journey and everything else, is that, I grew up believing that I was a literal child of God. And I think what happened is at some point in time, I've shifted to realizing, and it was in a book that I read once where, as a parent now, I don't really care what my children go out and do and play. I care that they get exercise. I care that they're safe. I care that they are honest, but I don't really care in the day-to-day minutia. And I was raised in sort of that there was a direct way and a direct response, and that God was very concerned with how we did things individually. So going back to Derek's thing where he said, it's pretty much off limits. We don't talk about it. There's nothing about it until we get married, and then it's between a man and a woman. And I sort of reversed that little line from Derek to the conversation we were having previous, which was, if you are open with and this goes back to discussing this morality with or this concept with your spouse or partner and the morality aspect of it, that it is truly between you and your wife. And that's even the guidance that the culture in the church that is in our landscape advises as well, of this is really between you two, figure it out. Going back one step further though, I think in a conservative background, we all grew up, especially because it's no, and then go. We deny our sexual beings. We deny a part of us, and that is that conflict. So when Hans said make peace, in my mind it was, you are inherently sexual. Like, we have been designed to procreate and to propagate our species. Like, that's what we do. And to shut that off and to condemn it and to put it into a corner there's going to be so much dissonance there, just grinding against each other. And you move on to the next stage where you get married and you're in this relationship, and you're still going to have this rejection of your sexual self. We look at each other. It's okay to have different haircuts and to drive different cars and to have different interests and to live different. Yet when we talk about sexual fantasies, it's not okay to have a sexual fantasy that is, we're worried about being rejected. We're worried about, if my wife realizes this was what I'm looking at, I'm a bad person because of this. And that to me is one of the things that I think is sort of that next thing of realizing, like, this is all who we are. And a fantasy is a fantasy, and it doesn't make us bad or wrong or anything if we still are within the realms of our agreement with our church or our partner or ourselves. Then accept that and love that. And then I'd be interested, if we approach that, then how different will our end experience be?
I have a question for you, Jake, and Hans as well. I want to, and it's inspired by what Jake just said, and it's also inspired by one of our live viewers who said, it's strange that the question about self-pleasure is based around men only. So here's my question. How would you respond if your partner approached you and said, hey, I need 30 minutes to go in the bedroom and I'm going to pursue, I'm going to go masturbate and maybe look at some porn? Would that bother you? Would it upset you?
No, it wouldn't anymore. I think there's times where it would take pressure off myself, right? Because
Hans, what do you think?
Wait, let Jake finish.
Sorry, Jake. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, say more, Jake.
I mean, truthfully, if you think about it, it's okay, you do that too, I do that. Phew, great, let's awesome. We've established that boundary. Great, go. like I said earlier with Chris, like I'll go around your friends on the kids so you can go have your experience. And that's the thing, I think, yeah, Hans, what's your take on that?
Really interesting thought exercise. Nate, thanks for introducing that. My reaction was similar to Jake's of that would be a relief. And I wouldn't have a moral conflict with it, but I did feel when you asked that question, I felt personal insecurity about, oh, maybe she likes that guy better than she likes me.
Interesting.
That was, I felt that. And that's just the honesty. So,
Okay, Hans, I want to slow down.
yeah,
You thought that. You didn't feel that. You thought that was your thought.
okay, yes,
When
I
you
thought
have
that.
that thought, what do you feel?
Now that I thought that thought, what do I feel?
Right.
I feel insecure. I feel, yes, threatened.
Yeah.
Thanks. I thought that, and then I felt insecure,
Yes.
felt threatened after it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought a long time ago as we were talking, I don't know if this is the right place, but Nate, when you asked that question also, and this goes back to a conversation I had with my wife, I was talking with her about being involved in these conversations and talking about porn. And we kind of recounted some of the experiences we went through when she fully realized my usage of porn. And she said the thing that hurt her the worst was the hidden nature of it. Now I'm emotional.
Deception.
Yeah. When she actually saw what it was that I was looking at, that was not for her. And I'm telling her story now. Her emotional reaction to seeing the material or seeing the imagery was not as bad as knowing that I was hiding it from her.
And where are you, Hans? What are you experiencing that makes you feel emotional when you take us back to that moment? What is this for you?
It's recognizing that I was hiding something from her, working very hard to hide something from my partner who otherwise I was professing my complete devotion to.
Do you have any recollection of why the hiding was your treatment plan? How'd you come up with that?
My recollection, I want to be as honest as I can here, and I'm thinking hard. It was easier to try to ignore it than to try to deal with the moral conflict that it caused in me and what I perceived my wife's reaction would be.
Yes.
So I was afraid of the judgments of people around me, my church, and my wife. And it seemed easier to hide it and ignore that than to try to reconcile that.
That's really honest of you, Hans. Thank you.
Nate, I got away. Thanks, Doug, for asking. I really like exploring that. I'm going back to your question, Nate, about what if our partners, we say wives, what if our partners had the same thing? How would we experience that? I think the unhiding of it is a huge part of it for me. I don't know what that means or how you two feel about that, but the unhiding of it is there's something there that's really massive.
What you seem to be saying is hiding is the solution to the terror and fear of having conversations so fraught with risk of judgment, moral condemnation, even possible shunning from one's religious community. These are really, really, really painful and terrifying consequences. Yeah. And so these are the solutions people come up with if those are the alternatives they see in front of them.
Thanks for honoring that, Doug. That's something I've thought about. We're lucky to be able to have these conversations in a place of mostly peace right now.
And what's different about that, Hans? Why? What are you able to do here?
It's hard, man. I have safety. I trust you people in this room with me, and I trust my wife now to be able to have these conversations with her. So I found safety.
It's a nice word, isn't it?
Yeah. There's not risk right here to be able to talk about it. I can talk about it without fear of risk and consequence.
Yeah.
And that's huge. Yeah.
Kristen, where are you at right now?
I'm just observing.
I haven't heard your voice in a while.
No, I'm really just trying to hold space for where you all are and where you're at, and to not. I think about the vulnerable nature of conversation. And when I think about couples or partnerships going into a conversation, they can have an idea in mind of where they're going to go with that conversation, what they're going to uncover, and that they're going to get to a conclusion that it's wrapped up with a nice bow. And I think we started with the question of what is pornography? And one of the agreements we made as a group is we will be open to where this conversation will go. that was the honest nature.
This is not scripted reality television, Kristen.
No, and that we could just keep getting back to let's get back to that. This is what we're here to talk about. However, I think to your point, Hans, how we get to safety is we show up and we're willing to be present. And there is a risk associated. I acknowledge that you're not just in a room with us, you're in a room with whoever's watching or listening. Yep. And that you have somehow found also a personal safety enough that if there were other people that didn't agree with you, you still have that found safety because you've maybe found safety with your people. So I'm just observing, and I want to really reflect that this process in partnerships, you can start off with, I want to talk to you about this. And if you're willing to be vulnerable and show up, then you can get to some pretty great places.
Yeah. One of the things I'm taking away from this conversation is that the reason that these conversations around the topic of pornography and sexual imagery are so painful and difficult for couples to navigate is because there are so many layers of complexity and emotion and values and morals and expectations and hopes, and so little practice talking about it. And we come to this conversation oftentimes in whether it's with a child that you found out is looking at pornography, or whether it's with a religious leader because it's something that is bothering you, or whether it's with your partner because it's something you're navigating within your relationship. Like, we all come to it with a pretty, it's possible to come to it with a pretty volatile set of emotions and judgments and worries and fears, and all of those things compounded all at the same time make this conversation a hard one to have. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like Hans, I'm grateful to be in this space where we're like slowly chipping away at it without a sense of urgency and without a sense of like needing answers to every single question now. Like, I love that we're giving each other space to kind of wrestle with these thoughts and ideas and experiences that we've never been given before. Mostly what I've received in my past, I'll just speak for myself, is just like judgment and fear. And that's what you have to operate from, is a space of like, don't disappoint anybody, don't hurt anybody, don't disappoint God, don't damage your relationship with God, don't get yourself addicted, don't become a slave, and good luck.
And I know we're short on time. I do just want to say,
terrible place to operate from.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people sitting with the question of what is pornography, that it oftentimes, even between partners, like, what do we want to do with pornography? Where does pornography fit in our life? It's not even a question. It's automatic for years of like, pornography is just bad. So what is the conversation? And I think that can be complex for people of, how do we answer this question? How do we even negotiate? It's, for many people, they're going to say there's not even a conversation to be had. There's no room for pornography in our partnership. There's no room for sexual imagery in our eternal life, and there's no room for any of this. So what is the conversation except for stop and be done and move on?
I mean, pornography is almost like one of our 7 deadly sins in our culture, right? Like if your husband's using pornography, like divorce, da da da. When if you look back at it, the conversation, and we gotta go, but you talk about this risk, right, Chris? Like if you're talking to your partner about this, you're risking. It is a risk, but you can't have trust unless you're willing to risk. And that's the theme that I heard through Hans and these other things of like, it's never the actual usage or the thing that's really, it's the fear, it's the rejection, it's the judgment, it's the like, and we have created ourselves sort of this hornet's nest. What we really want is open transparency and acceptance and love, and then you hash it out. And I love how Nate said, you know, we talk about this in bite-sized chunks with no rush to get to the answer. And it, to me, that's, you're coming at it from understanding, not with a preconceived notion of this is who you should be and how you should be in my life, but like, let me understand you and your sexuality and then risking that it might make you comfortable. It might make you, you know, have a response, but that's okay. And to just sit with it, because ultimately, I think in these relationships, like there is true love, but the dishonesty, the hiding, the shame, the judgment, that's what starts to polarize people and separate people.
The best point I had in my marriage, speaking as a partner, after Jake and I wrestled making the decision of, I want to know Jake. I want to know who.
Oh, don't, because I'll do it too.
Wait, Jake, give Kristen a moment here.
No, this was a distinct moment, and it was conscious, and it was hard, and it was painful, and I've had to make this choice over and over. It wasn't a one-time choice, but it was, I want to know Jake as he is. I want to know Jake, I don't want to know Jake as who I need him to be to keep me comfortable. I want to know him, which is going to make me really uncomfortable. But I made the choice of, I want to know him, not only know the parts of him that I need him. I'm not saying it how I want, but I can hear the phrase of, I want to know him. I want to understand him as he is, not who I need him to be. And that was, again, we are still unpacking getting to know each other. And it is a choice, and it is a choice to show up as we are. And it is a choice for me to hold space and to manage my own emotions. When Jake shares a part of himself that is new, that is not comfortable, that maybe that's not what I want him to be, but wow, has our marriage changed a massive direction because of that singular choice.
So before we end, I want to make one observation about our hour. We started with talking about what is porn, and there were these very clear opinions we were giving. We said sentences that were very clear. We kind of sounded like we had really cool thoughts we wanted to share. And then we started conversations. And when we got into real conversation, notice how everybody said, oh, this isn't going to come out very good. Oh, I'm not being very clear. Oh, I can't believe I'm saying this. Oh, wait. And you know you're in a vulnerable conversation when you're not speaking in a way that you're confident. And so the fact that we got to less confident moments, we got to moments where people were muddled and uncertain, this is the territory we need to be going into if we're going to understand our relationship with pornography.
Beautifully said, Doug. So we want to be respecters of everybody's time here. So we're going to wrap up this conversation now. And I just want to invite you, I want to let anybody who's watching or listening to know that this is a process. We're going to be having these conversations live every Thursday for the foreseeable future. And our goal is to, one, do exactly what Doug just said, model these conversations for you and show you what they can look like. And then number two, as we go further down the road, we hope to give you some practical resources to help you navigate these conversations productively. We are receiving your questions. We've received a lot of questions that have been submitted through the Q&A form, and we'll definitely get to answering those down the line. And just want to thank you all for participating with us as we have this conversation. The fact that we get to have this conversation is a joy in and of itself. And I think the fact that we get to share it with others who are experiencing it as that's having a positive impact on their life is just the icing on the cake. So thank you for participating. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing this with people who need it. And thank you for being on this journey with us as we kind of wrestle with this really nuanced and charged topic. And we'll see you guys next week.